Alrighty, well welcome back guys, welcome to the channel. So if you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify, make sure you hit a like or hit a subscribe. We're just starting this stuff off. We've had the Instagram going for a little bit, but now we're going to push more into the visual stuff with the YouTube and more the long talks of segments for Spotify. Alrighty, well let's start. So what we're going to do on this segment, I put something out on Instagram the other day talking about the three main things to look at when you're going to purchase a pool. So I thought what I'm going to start with is probably the most talked about section of when someone is buying a pool is how much does a pool cost? So I thought I'm going to break it down into two sections for you guys so that way you can understand a little bit more about how we go about pricing a pool and what you guys need to look at when understanding a quote. So I'm going to break it into two sections like I just said. We're going to break into the pool itself. We're going to talk about the components that you must have. We're going to talk about the accessories that you can add onto it. And then we're going to lead into talking about the landscape. So more finishing things that we can have later on. So let's get started with talking about what is going to be, where are you going to start the project from? Where are you going to start from? So usually we start our pricing from somewhere around like your basic model is going to start anywhere from $50,000. We go all the way up to $300,000 for a swimming pool. Now there's so many different variables that you can add into a pool. That's where they start to add up and you start to blow your budget out if you've got a certain amount of money that you want to work with. But I thought let's talk about what are the things that are going to start off. So we're going to talk about the size of the pool. So the size of the pool is going to determine obviously your cost for now the pool shell itself. That's going to be a direct relation to the excavation costs for the swimming pool, the insulation for the swimming pool, and then what we would call about is just a standard concrete beam around a pool. So every pool has to have a certain amount of concrete around it, usually being a 400mm beam. So the size of the pool is really where you're going to start from. Now that's going to be determined by how big your backyard is. That's going to be determined about your council regulations. Things like that, and what is going to work for you though. Now, if you're a family that spends a lot of time in the swimming pool and you've got the room, you're probably going to want to add a few things on there, such as a bigger size swimming pool, maybe a medium sized pool. You might want to add a little area into the swimming pool so that the kids or the adults can sort of sit around watching the kids in the pool. These things are all factors that we'll talk to you about when we're doing a quote, but it's something that you guys need to understand as well about what you need. Now, when we get into excavation, this is probably where the price can start to fluctuate in more of the fixed items. Now, if you've got really easy access, that's really going to be where you're going to keep your costs down. Now, people that are building on vacant blocks these days because they're buying new estates, they've got the most cost effective and the cheapest category of what you would call an excavation. You can literally bring a machine in, bring a truck, load the dirt straight into a truck and then get out. Now, when we're moving into more of our areas and residential areas now that are more built up, the new estates where people are now building a pool after their house is finished, we can move into things like a mini dig. Now, a mini dig essentially is most houses will have a minimum requirement to be around a meter or 1100 mils gap between their house and their boundary. Now, that's where you get into a mini dig. Now, I do know that they're making the blocks even smaller now. So that's where you might move into things like a micro dig where it's even smaller again. Or what we have done, we've now got two projects that we've completed now where we've actually craned machinery into the backyard, had to do all the excavation with the machinery in there. There was no access to get a machinery down the side of the house. So that there, you could already tell that's going to be a very costly excavation. So that's where we then went in there, built the project for the client and said, okay, well, what are the things that we need to be aware of at the start of the budget? So we said straight away off the bat, you're gonna need a crane, you're gonna need 2 cranes to get the machinery in. We had to crane the pool in, we had to crane the dirt out, we had to crane the machines out. So that's where we as salesmen and as we as people in the industry look at it and go, okay, well, what are the must-haves that we're gonna have to start with? And then where can we build your pool price from there? So this is where we then start to talk about your budget. Now, some people might get really scared and go, okay, look, I wasn't even thinking of that. I had a budget in mind of, I'm not gonna throw out numbers, but a lot of people might go, look, I had a budget of this. If I can't do it for that, well then I'm just gonna have a look somewhere else. But these are all things as a salesman, our salesmen are trained, and obviously us in the office, we're trained to be able to look at the things that are gonna be a bit of a challenge. Now that's where I'm gonna move into the second thing, a crane lift. Now you're gonna have a crane lift to get your fiberglass pool from the front yard into the backyard. So this is something again that our salesmen are gonna have a look at. They're gonna have a look at any obstacles, overhead power lines, trees, what's the access like for the crane? Can we get the crane as close to the house as we possibly can to make the lift distance shorter? The shorter the lift, the smaller the crane that we need. Now it's all about reach when you're lifting swimming pools in. So it's not about the weight. Usually a pool can range from around 900 to a ton or 1,000 kilograms. So really it's the reach that we've got to get with the crane lifting a ton out that far. So that's where us as salesmen and us as quotas, when we're doing your work, we're gonna have a look at those things to make sure that we're not gonna give you any unforeseen items that are gonna pop up. Because we know as well as you do, you've got a budget. We're not just gonna come in there and build a project for you, or sorry, I'm gonna say build a quote for you, and then when we get halfway through the stage, add these little extras in later because we were too afraid to tell you about it in the start. Because then we're actually gonna do ourselves a disservice and possibly have the chance of not even getting paid for it. So other things to consider, obviously the installation is gonna be dependent on what swimming pool you pick, the run of pipe that we're gonna have to do, how far away the field equipment is gonna be away from the pool itself. These are all things that we can pretty much get a rough idea, well not a rough idea, we actually can get them pretty much fully quoted as a fixed price. And then things like the concrete beam, like I said. So that's how we do our pool plan as the section 1, so the pool itself, and then we build onto it from there. Things you need to also keep mindful of, it's gonna be things like council fees. So if you're in an area where you can do what we call a CDC, so a compliant development, you don't have to use the council, you can use a private certifier to do all the planning for you, get all of the planning documents ready. They're a lot cheaper than going what we call a DA, so a development application. A DA is a long process. Now staying under a CDC is things like keeping the pool a meter away from the boundary, making sure the pool is no more than 600 mils out of the ground, just generic stuff that makes it a pretty simple process. When we start going our pools that are out of ground, so what we call our maxi ribs, or areas where there's different land validation, so there could be flood zones, there could be bushfire zones, they're all then classed as DA. So there are a lot more rules and regulations that you have to stay within when building. They become quite a long process. We've actually just had a project that was in a DA because the pool was in a front yard. And I'm pretty sure after speaking to Dad, the pool ended up being in DA for around 9 months. So it's not really a process that sort of we can hurry up. It starts to get reliant on the council and whoever the planner is that is dealing with your plan. We just got to try and keep on top of them. Make sure that we've given them enough information and planning as we go. And that way that when they have all the info, they can try and move it along as fast as they can. Well, let's now move into, we talked about the crane lift, we talked about the council fees. Another thing that we pretty much always also talk to you about is the electrical. You obviously need to get electrical from somewhere in your meter box or the house to where the field equipment's gonna go. So that's something you need to be aware of as well. We've got to get power down to the pool equipment to run all your pool pumps and power over your lighting and things like that. So these are all things that we have a look at and we put in an allowance for when we're doing the quote, but it's something that you guys need to be aware of as well. Make sure you're thinking of these things when you're gonna build a pool. Now, the variation stage. So we spoke about variations being in the excavation. That is really the one area where your pool project could start to blow out a little bit. Now we're gonna talk about things like rock excavation. So if we hit rock on your pool excavation, obviously, we've got everything written down in your contract when we do the quoting stage and the contract stage, which has all of the pricings for variations for things like that for rock. But rock is something that can become quite costly and expensive. What can typically take a pool excavation 1 to 2 days can blow out anywhere from going into a 3rd day to even a 5th day, things like that. Now, most of the time in our areas that we work in, being out in the Western Sydney, We got a lot of clay, so we don't tend to find rock as much as we used to when we used to work in the northern beaches. The northern beaches is just full of rock. It's all on sandstone over there. We do tend to find shale and things like that over here, but not particularly the ironstone and the sandstone that we used to find in the northern beaches. So obviously, you being a pool buyer, you know where you live. You should be able to have a pretty good idea of just knowing the demographic of where you live and the area and the environment, what you're probably going to find. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because rock excavation can go anywhere from $5,000 or $3,000 all the way up to $10,000, sometimes even $15,000. Like I said, it all starts from the very beginning of what size pool you go. So just remember that. The bigger the pool you go, the bigger the hole you're going to excavate. The more soil you've got to get rid of, the more rock you got to get rid of if you have rock. And obviously the more rock you need to excavate with a hammer or a saw when you're doing a rock excavation. So they're typically things in the very initial part where you will find most of your variations. You don't tend to find too many more when you're doing the initial excavation and the installation of the pool, because it's quite a simple thing to then quote. We know what the pool's going to cost us. We know what it costs to do an installation. We all have a breakdown compared to each pool about what the excavation and the installation costs. So all we do is we just copy and paste those pricings in when we build a pool quote. Like I said, the only real thing you can start to have problems with is rock excavation. And actually, I think the other one I could probably talk about is mixed waste. So whether you've got buried rubbish in the ground, we do find that sometimes over in the western side, over the western suburbs, they used to have a lot of it. They used to bury a lot of stuff over there. So just keep in mind things like that. If you know that you had a renovation done in your house previous when you were living there, so maybe someone else did it. A lot of the time in the old days, they used to dig a hole in the backyard and they used to put all their rubbish in the backyard and just bury it over. And it's usually wherever you go and put a pool in. So just remember that. These are things that they're unforeseen. So rock is unforeseen. You don't really know how much rock you're gonna have until we start. All right, let's talk about the next process that we do when we are building the pool quote. So we've started with the basic items. So things that we need to just obviously give you a swimming pool. We obviously need to do this when we're quoting because we need to compare ourselves with the other competitors in the market. So us at APS, we don't typically ever build these pools, what we call the real basic pools. We're sort of building a little bit more of a luxury item for us, for our clients, something that they're probably gonna live in for a long time. So we're building a long lasting pool for them. But this is the next stage we get into, or our salesman gets into when they're doing the quoting stage. So when you're building with APS, we generally always, obviously we talk about the inflow and the self-cleaning the most. So our opinion in our company and our view as a business, what we want to sell and what we are very passionate about is obviously the self-cleaning and the in-floor cleaning system. That's what sets us apart from the other companies, and we found our own niche market in doing that. So that's what we promote the most at APS, not just because it's a sale point for us, it's just because we really back it and believe it, and we want our customers to have the simplest pool that you possibly can. And we believe, and there's a lot of other people out there, if you read the forums and stuff like that, a self-cleaning pool is probably the most low maintenance and cost-effective thing you can have in the long run. Now, so like I just said, we generally will then build the quote from the basic pool. We'll then start to add on the self-cleaning component of the swimming pool quote. We then move into, there are our two main things, self-cleaning and water management. So we believe if you're gonna have a self-cleaning pool, which is obviously circulating its water every time the pumps are running, we believe that the best way then to run that is to obviously pair it with a water management system. So something that's gonna be checking your pH and something that's gonna be checking your chemical levels all the time. So adding acid into the pool when it needs it. From there, we will then dive into things like heating, whether you're gonna add a heater on the pool. Now I hear a lot of people, potentially when they start looking into buying a pool, they will say, why would you get a heater? You're gonna swim in a pool because you wanna cool down. Now that is right. Yes, obviously that's the main purpose for a swimming pool, is when it's a hot day to cool down. But when you are spending, I'm gonna put in a rough term, between let's say $80,000 to $150,000 on a swimming pool, you're gonna wanna be able to use that as much as you can. So extending the season coming into winter or colder months to be able to put a heater on the pool is quite cost effective. If you're gonna go from using your pool only 4 months of the year to possibly even 6 months of the year, I think it's a very smart thing to do. Now, us at APS, we probably put around 90% of our pools that we install have a heater on it. 100% of our pools have a heater provision. So if later on that you wanna go and add a heater, you can do that. And this is where I'm gonna talk about things like the options that I can add later. So what are the things that I need to have now, but what are the things that I can do later? And a heater is a classic example of something that you don't need to get straight away, but you can possibly get down the future. Now, when it comes to self-cleaning and a heater, the price of a heater is about, let's say, maybe a third of what the price of the self-cleaning is gonna be. So if we go, okay, we have a budget that we wanna work to, we really want the self-cleaning, but we also really want that heater to be able to extend it. Well, us as salesmen are probably always going to try and lean you towards, let's do the self-cleaning component now because we can't add it in later. Let's just do a heater provision for now. And then when you've maybe got a little bit more money, or you might even find out, you know what, I don't even need the heater. You can obviously not have a heater on the pool. It's very simple. You either buy one and install one, plumb it in, that's it. You can't plumb the in-floor cleaning and after. You can't do it. So these are the things that we try and educate you guys, and I want you guys to know is just think of the things that are essential to you about what you want to make your life happy when you're gonna swim in a swimming pool. Now, having a heater is very good. Obviously, if you don't like cold water, that's fair enough. So that's where we then start to talk about the must-haves and the options. Option number 2 is probably a multicolored light. Now this is something that you can change later. You can put a single color light in to start off with, and it's very simple to interchangeable change the lens from a single color light to a multicolored light. Other things is, generally speaking, we always start our quoting off as a cartridge filter. That's just because what we have found, the competition obviously quotes as well. It's the most cost effective when it comes to the filtering part. For peace of mind and cleanliness, a glass media filter is the probably the #1 way to go when you're trying to keep your pool as clean as you can. You can go down the paths of adding a UV or ozone as well, which is another secondary sanitizer. We haven't really moved into that realm yet at APS. We're looking into it using the ozone technology. It's just what we call a secondary sanitizer. So you still have your standard chlorinator, which generates salt in the chlorine, but you go to a secondary sanitizer, it breaks down all those particles that a chlorinator can't break down. So all those real bad pathogens in the water. That's moving into more of almost, not a commercial type of filtration equipment, but that is how the commercial pool plumbing is done. So they have to use 2 types of secondary sanitation. But anyway, that's getting on well beyond sort of your basic swimming pool filtration system that you might have in your backyard. But it's something to look at because it is coming in the industry. In America, it's very big now, the ozone. We've seen it a lot at our local splash event. And I think a lot of the companies now, Pentair, Hayward, Theralux, they're all obviously making them as well and push them out in the market. But something to think about, like I said, do your research. I might touch on maybe something like that in another episode. But if you guys are interested, let me know and maybe I will. All right, let's move into the extras on the pool itself. So what can I add on as well? So we're gonna talk about things like that might make your pool a little bit more enjoyable for you, or something that's gonna add a little bit of a difference to your pool compared to maybe your friend's pool. So now I'm gonna talk about things like spa jets or waterfall blades or sun pods. Things like that you might go, look, I just wanna add a little bit of a touch of a feature to my pool because I want my backyard to be more of a feature, things like that. Now these can range from anywhere from maybe $1,000, $2,000 all the way up to $5,000, $10,000. they're all things that obviously you can talk to a salesman about and the builder about when they're quoting your pool. We do a couple of them all the time. We do spar jets probably in around 90% of our pools as well. It's just something that we add for the kids love it. We put them on our sanctuary range swimming pool. So our sanctuary is a long bench along the whole length of the pool. We usually put 4 or 6 of them along the bench, and then even adults can sit down on the bench, put their arms up on the sides of the pool, and then the spar jets are just there. Other things you would have seen in some of my videos, things like sun pods. So we did a pool where we had sun pods wrapping around 3 sides. That was pretty cool. It was a really nice feature. We just completed a blade waterfall into a swimming pool, which had some stack stone along it. Now that served 2 purposes. That, for example, the client already needed to have a retaining wall that was going to go along the backside of the pool. So when we were in the build stage, I actually went out there and had a look with Dad while we were getting ready to do the job. And I said, like, we've got the opportunity here to add a little bit of a feature here for the client. They had already chosen to possibly either do sun pods anyway. And I said, look, I think it's going to look a lot nicer. We've already got a retaining wall that's going to go along the back here. Let's add a blade waterfall and we'll cut it with some stone. And the client was absolutely stoked with it. They were a little bit nervous at the start because they'd seen photos of the sun pods that we had done before. They weren't too sure about the blade waterfall. They said, look, I'll trust you guys with your experience. And after the end of it, they loved it. So you can see a photo of that and a video of that on our Instagram, but it's really nice. It just adds something a little bit different to their swimming pool for them that makes it their own. Other things we need to talk about is probably things like a blanket roller. If you're going to have a heater, it's essential to have a blanket. Very essential to have a blanket for your thermal of your heating when you're heating a pool. It's also a council regulation most of the time if you're going to have a heater on a pool to have a blanket anyway, to obviously keep energy costs down so you're not just heating a body of water with no blanket on it. I've done a video talking about blanket rollers on YouTube before, talking about the thermal capabilities of a blanket. Really, there's probably maybe 4 blankets that you can sort of have a look at. You've got your standard blanket, which we use, which is a daisy blanket. It's just a freestanding frame with a blanket roller. Then we move into our other one, which we use, which is our sunbather one. Now that is a in-ground blanket roller with a thermal cover on it. You can go down the path of a Remco roller. That's a fully inbuilt roller that actually is bolted to your swimming pool. I've never done one. They're amazingly expensive, but that's a proper full cover which rolls out over the top of your pool and pretty much seals it. I'd love to do one, but just the pricing of it is absolutely insane. But these are things to have a look at. Like I said, if you're gonna have a heater, definitely look at getting a blanket roller. So I think that's pretty much gonna cover off everything in the initial stage of building your pool quote, of how we build a pool quote. Other than that, that sort of gets your pool up to a stage where we will then pour a 400 beam around the pool. So 400 beam is technically a 1 coping tile. So that's what we call a coping tile. Now that is the structure part of your swimming pool. So that actually becomes a structure of the pool shell itself. So you have to have a minimum 400 beam around the pool. From there, I'll move into the second subject we're going to talk about, which is the landscaping. But really, that is probably the bare minimum. Like I said, you might start at the $50,000 mark. You're gonna have a pool with a standard filtration or a basic filtration, 1 pool light. You're not gonna have a heater. You're not gonna have a blanket roller. You're gonna have a 400 beam around the pool and that's it. So technically speaking, we only do maybe 1 or 2 of them a year. Some of the time we might do 1 or 2 of them a year with just the in-floor in it. So they've bought the basic pool, but they've just added the in-floor into it. Then later on down the track, they might go and do their tiling themselves, but we're gonna move into our second category. But that's where you can sort of start basing your pool off, is what the minimum things you need to have to build your pool quote, and then from there we can head on to our extras, which we'll go into in part 2.